Wherever the Wind Takes Us. Written by Yvonne Cook. Illustrated by Carol Herring. Published by the Wright Group, a division of the McGraw-Hill Companies. The journey begins. You may have heard the story of Around the World in 80 Days. Well, I went around the world too, but it took much longer than 80 days. It took 2 years, and it was the best time of my life. Let me tell you my story. It all started when my dad lost his job. He used to work in a tall office building in the city. His office was on the 26th floor. He worked at a big desk with a computer on it. Dad was always very busy. Sometimes he didn't even get home from work until my sister Libby and I were in bed. Sometimes he even worked on Saturdays. My dad really liked his job. At least I thought he did. One day, Dad came home from work early. He looked happy. My mother asked, "Sam, why are you home so early?" "I lost my job, Wilma," he said. "The company's been sold and the new owners don't need me anymore." "What will we do, Sam?" asked my mother. "I think we should go on a trip," said Dad. "Where to?" I asked. "Around the world, David," he said. We all thought Dad was joking, but he wasn't. Within a month, we had sold our house and we were heading down the road in a camper. Driving through Canada. We left our small town just outside San Francisco, California, on a Monday morning. We were very excited and still couldn't believe that we were really going. "Which way are we going?" I asked Dad. "Wherever the wind takes us, David," Dad said. He had been acting very strange since he had lost his job. We headed north toward Canada through the Cascade Mountains. The trees were really magnificent. We saw many great things in Canada. We saw grizzly bears, moose, and even a wolf. We went fishing in rivers and streams. Dad always cooked the fish we caught on an open fire. He had never cooked at home. We didn't even know he could cook. Now he cooked the best food we had ever tasted. Libby and I thought that the worst part about our travels would be missing out on school. We were wrong. The world became our school and our parents became our teachers. We learned how to read from maps and how to tie knots. We learned about different people, different places, and different animals. It took us 6 weeks to drive across Canada. When we got to the Atlantic Ocean, Dad said, "Let's go down to New York City." Wow, New York! Libby and I couldn't believe it. We had always wanted to see the Empire State Building. A fast balloon to England. Just outside New York, Dad saw a sign saying, "Hot air balloon rides." He started to grin. "That sounds like a good idea," he said. "How long a ride do you want?" asked Harry, the man in charge of the hot air balloons. "That depends," Dad replied. "How long will it take to fly to England?" The man thought Dad was silly, but by the following week, we had sold the camper and bought our very own hot air balloon. We were about to set off for England. Dad didn't fly the balloon. Harry came along as the pilot. "Before we go to England," said Dad to Harry, Fly over the Empire State Building, please." And that's just what we did. It was amazing. We waved at the people standing at the top of the Empire State Building, and they waved back. Far below, the cars on the busy New York streets looked like ants. Our bright red balloon didn't have a basket hanging below it like normal hot air balloons. Instead, it had what looked like a cabin. The cabin was small, very small. "This cabin is so small," said Libby. "Yes," Dad answered. "Isn't it great?" I thought it was great too, at first, but after a week of living in one tiny room and eating tuna from a can, I wished we could touch ground again. Early one morning, just when we couldn't stand the thought of more tuna, Harry called out, "Land ahead!" It was great to see land again after a week over the Atlantic Ocean. The first land we saw was Ireland, not England. It looked lovely from the air. There were lots of green hills and small villages. Libby and I wanted to land, but Harry said, "Nasty storm coming, children. I think we should keep moving." By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we were flying over Windsor Castle to the west of London. Libby and I wondered if the Queen of England was at Windsor Castle. Libby thought she saw a woman working in the garden. She was sure that it was the Queen, but Dad told us he didn't think it would be. We landed right near the River Thames. In fact, we landed in the river, right near Tower Bridge. That was the end of our balloon. Luckily, we rescued all of our belongings before they got too wet. England was fun. We saw lots of castles and the crown jewels, but we didn't see the Queen. Libby decided to write her a letter to tell her how much we liked her country. After about a month in England, Dad said, "I think it's time to move on." "Where to now?" I asked. "Wherever the wind takes us, David," said Dad. The wind took us to the station where we caught the train to France. To Africa on a little white yacht. In Paris, we sipped lemonade and ate pastries at the outside tables. Libby said she could live there forever. Our mother agreed, but Dad and I wanted to get moving again. We bought a funny car with only 3 wheels, 2 at the back and 1 at the front, and headed south to the Mediterranean Sea. We must have looked funny. 4 people and 3 suitcases in a tiny 3-wheeled car. At first, we were scared that the car would roll over every time we went around a bend. But Libby and I knew that our mother drove far too slowly for that. Late one night, we came to a tiny fishing village. We stopped the car next to a small white yacht. On the side of the yacht was a sign saying, "For hire." I heard Dad saying something about "wherever the wind takes us," and before long we found ourselves aboard the yacht sailing across the Mediterranean Sea. The water and the sky were so blue. Libby and I swam in the sea and lay on the deck reading books. Whenever there was a good wind, Dad got us to hoist the sails. We watched as the wind filled them and pushed us further away from France. Within a couple of weeks, we reached the mouth of the Nile River in Egypt. It was a very busy place. Large ships, barges, rafts, and small fishing boats cluttered the murky water. we met up with the man and woman who were going to sail our little yacht back to France. It was sad to watch it moving off into the night. We stayed in Egypt just long enough to pick up some tents. Then we went to the airport and caught a jet plane. It seemed funny to travel in a modern aircraft after the balloon, the three-wheeled car, and the yacht. Dad really wanted us to see the open grasslands and jungles of Africa. So that's what we did. Soon we were having another great adventure, this time riding high up on the backs of elephants. Our mother was not very happy about riding on an elephant, but our guide, Rudiki, told us it was the safest place to be. From the backs of the elephants, we saw lions and cheetahs, antelopes and giraffes. The best thing about Africa was the sunsets. They were the most beautiful I had ever seen. I was so glad that the wind had blown us there. Bound for Australia. We had come a long way already, but the next part of our journey was to be the longest. One morning, as we stood watching the sun rise over the Indian Ocean, Dad said, "I think the wind is blowing again." "Where do you think it's blowing to this time, Dad?" I asked. "Australia, David, Australia," he said. I didn't know much about Australia, but I did know it was a long way away. In the city of Durban, Dad heard about an old submarine that was heading for Australia. Libby and I had never been in a submarine before. We were really excited. It took us so long to get to Australia that I can't tell you all of the things that happened. But we did see blue whales and great white pointer sharks, seals, and a giant octopus. We arrived in Australia looking for some open space after the small cabins on the submarine. We soon joined a camel train headed for Uluru, which is also called Ayers Rock. Uluru is the world's largest rock, almost right in the middle of Australia. For days we rode on the camels. Nothing could be as bumpy as riding on a camel. Libby was just saying she couldn't last another day when we saw Uluru in the distance. It was amazing. The rock changed from orange to red and then purple as the sun set over it. It made the bumpy camel ride worthwhile. From Uluru, we caught a ride on a road train, which is really a truck with a lot of long trailers joined together. The road train was headed for Sydney. The following week, we sailed on a racing yacht under Sydney's famous bridge and past Sydney's famous opera house and on to New Zealand. New Zealand and home. Libby got really seasick on the way to New Zealand. Day after day, huge seas battered our boat. Sometimes the waves were taller than the mast of the yacht. The crew made sure we stayed below in our cabin. This was the worst part of our entire journey. It was so bad that sometimes I wished we had never started out. After 3 days, the seas calmed down. We sailed along the coast of New Zealand and into Auckland. Dad told us that Auckland was the biggest city in New Zealand. He said it was called the City of Sails. I could see why. There were yachts everywhere. But Libby and I didn't ever want to go on a yacht again. We spent 5 days in New Zealand. We had the most fun. Mother, Libby, and I went whitewater rafting while Dad went on a tandem parachute jump. We wanted to stay forever, but Dad said the winds were changing and it was time to go home. We caught a jet back to San Francisco. We had been away for 2 years. 2 wonderful years. We had ridden on camels and elephants. We had floated through the air and sailed on the sea. But now it was time to go home. Today, we live in a new house, and Dad has another job in a big office building in the city. Sometimes I think that our journey around the world was a dream. But then, on the weekends, Dad will say, "Where will the wind take us this weekend?" Even though it's only for 2 days, we pack our things and away we go. We never know where we'll end up.